was 3 minutes into my morning report when the ship's alarm went silent. Not quiet, silent. Every warning tone, every hum of the ventilation system, every low beep from the navigation console, gone. The kind of silence that does not happen by accident. Lieutenant Colin Hart looked up from his station with wide eyes, and I was already out of my chair before he could speak. "Commander Vale," he said, "something is coming through on every channel." Every channel. That phrase hit differently in deep space. We were aboard the UEF Relentless, 42 light minutes from the nearest relay station, and something was pushing a signal through every channel we had. Military, civilian, emergency, encrypted, open. All of them at once. I walked to the main screen and told Colin to put it up. What I saw will stay with me until I stop breathing. Ilara Station was on fire. Not the kind of fire you see in training simulations, where everything burns cleanly and the camera stays far enough away that it almost looks like art. This was real fire, the kind that feeds on oxygen leaking from broken walls, the kind that turns the inside of a structure into a glowing mouth. Ilara Station was a frontier colony, home to about 4,000 people, located at the edge of the Kessel Reach. It was not a military installation. It was not a strategic target. It was a place where people raised families, grew crops in pressurized domes, and sent their children to school in buildings with hand-painted murals on the walls. I had visited once, 2 years before. I remembered the murals. Now the murals were ash. The signal was not just a visual feed. It was being transmitted with accompanying audio in galactic standard, which every registered species in the known galaxy used as a shared language for trade and diplomacy. A voice spoke over the images of the burning station. A smooth, almost calm voice. The kind that belongs to someone who believes they are performing for an audience. "Let this reach every world that considers itself a neighbor to the human species," the voice said. "Let it be understood that the Vreth Dominion does not negotiate with species that have not yet earned the right to negotiate. Humans have expanded beyond their designated frontier. This is the correction." The images shifted. I saw corridors I recognized. Wide, metal-plated walkways designed for cargo transport that doubled as school paths, because Ilara Station had never had the budget for separate buildings. I saw people running, adults, and then the camera moved, or whoever was operating it moved it deliberately, and I saw the children. There were hundreds of them. They were being guided, in groups, by Vreth soldiers, tall, heavily armored figures moving with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this before. The children were not fighting. They were too young or too frightened or too stunned to fight. They moved where they were pushed. Some were crying without sound, their mouths open, the audio too far away to pick up anything so small as a child crying in a hallway full of burning walls. My navigator, Priya, made a sound behind me. I did not turn around. I could not take my eyes off the screen. The Vreth voice continued. 312 human children have been taken into Dominion custody. They will serve a productive function within our labor infrastructure. This is not a negotiation. This is a demonstration. If any human vessel enters Vreth territorial space within the next standard cycle, we will consider it an act of hostility and respond accordingly. The feed stayed on. They left it running. They wanted us to watch. I watched. I watched with the kind of focused calm that comes not from being unbothered, but from being so far past bothered that your body stops knowing how to show it. I cataloged everything on that screen, the direction of the light sources, the markings on the Vreth soldier's armor, the layout of the corridor, the number of children I could count in each frame. And then I saw the jacket. It was red, bright red, with a yellow patch on the left shoulder that had a little rocket stitched onto it. I had bought it at a market on New Dublin Station 14 months ago, because my daughter Mara had pointed at it through the window and said it looked like something a real explorer would wear. She was 7 years old and wanted to be an explorer when she grew up, and I had bought the jacket without hesitating, and I had put it in her hands, and she had worn it every day since then. She was on Ilara Station, visiting her grandmother for the school holiday. The girl in the red jacket on the screen was being walked down the corridor with the others. She was not crying. She was looking around at everything, with the same wide, serious expression Mara had when she was trying to understand something that did not make sense to her yet. I became something else in that moment. I do not mean that in a dramatic way. I mean it as a simple biological fact. Whatever version of Commander Asha Vale had existed before that image appeared on my screen, the tired officer counting down to retirement, the woman who still thought the galaxy was mostly manageable, the person who believed that careful diplomacy and measured responses were the tools of civilized space travel, that version ended. What replaced her was not rage. Rage is hot and blinding. What replaced her was something cold and very, very precise. I turned to my crew. "Colin," I said, "record everything on this feed, every frame. Tag it with timestamp and coordinates." "Already doing it, Commander." "Priya, calculate fastest route to UEF Fleet Command. 14 hours at maximum, Commander." "Then we are going maximum. Open a priority channel to Fleet Command. Code Crimson. Tell them Commander Vale is inbound with a full data package and requires an emergency assembly of the Security Council." Nobody asked me questions. My crew were not people who asked questions when the commander's voice had that particular quality to it. They moved. Every one of them moved immediately. I went back to my cabin for exactly 6 minutes. I sat down. I put my hands flat on my desk, and I looked at the wall, and I let myself feel it. All of it. The fear, and the grief, and the cold fury. Because a commander who does not let herself feel things in private will eventually let them come out in the wrong place. 6 minutes. Then I stood up, washed my face, and went back to the bridge. The feed from Alara Station was still transmitting. I left it up on the main screen, the entire 14-hour journey to Fleet Command. Every member of my crew saw it. None of them looked away for long. When we docked at Fleet Command Station Arcturus, I was met at the airlock by 3 admirals, 2 members of the Security Council, and a woman named Director Clara Osei from the Office of Species Relations, who had worked in galactic diplomacy for 30 years, and whose face, when she looked at me, told me she already knew everything. "We have seen the feed," she said. "Then you know what I am going to ask for," I said. She nodded slowly. "I know what you are going to ask for. The question is, what we are going to give you." The Security Council session began 40 minutes later. 73 people in a room that had been designed for exactly this kind of meeting, not for comfort, but for gravity, for the understanding that decisions made inside these walls would be felt across light years. I had been in this room twice before, once for a commendation ceremony, once for a border dispute hearing. Neither time had felt like this. Admiral Grant Hollis opened the session. He was 64 years old, had commanded 3 different fleet actions, and had a face that people described as carved rather than aged. He did not use soft words. "The Vreth Dominion has committed an act of unprovoked aggression against a non-military human settlement. They have taken 312 human children into custody as, in their words, labor assets. This council will now hear the full intelligence assessment, after which we will vote on a response designation." The intelligence briefing took 2 hours. By the time it was done, every person in the room knew 3 things clearly. First, Ilara Station had no military capacity, no weapons system, no strategic value to anyone. It was chosen specifically because it was soft and visible, and its pain would broadcast well. Second, the Vreth Dominion had been planning this for at least 8 months. The attack was not impulsive. It was a message, composed carefully, aimed at the entire galactic community, as much as at humanity. They wanted to demonstrate that humans could be handled. Third, the children were alive. Intelligence sources confirmed they had been transported to a Vreth labor processing facility in the Dominion's interior, a place called Sector Veth 7, 4 days' travel from the border at standard speed. When the briefing ended, the room was very quiet. Director Osei spoke first. "The Galactic Community Council has already reached out. 12 species have transmitted formal concern. 3 have advised us to pursue diplomatic channels. The Soth, the eldest registered species in our quadrant, who have not communicated directly with Earth in over 60 years, sent a single message. It said, 'Do not escalate. You are young. You do not yet know what you carry.' A council member named Representative Alan Marsh said, 'What do we carry?' Nobody answered that question for a long moment. Then I spoke. I had not been scheduled to speak at this session. I was a commander, not a council member, and technically, I was there as a witness to the original feed, not as a participant. But I spoke, and nobody stopped me. 'With respect to the Soth,' I said, 'they are very old. Old enough to have learned patience as a survival tool. We are not as old. And patience, right now, is not what 312 children need. Admiral Hollis looked at me for a long moment. "Commander Vale," he said, "one of those children is yours." "Yes," I said, "she is. And if the Council decides that compromises my clarity on this matter, I will accept that judgment. But before you make that call, I want every person in this room to look at the feed from Alara Station one more time. Not the fire, not the soldiers, the children's faces. Look at them for 30 seconds. Then tell me that patience is the correct response." Nobody told me that. The vote came 3 hours later. It was the fastest Security Council vote on record. The motion put to them was designated Response Authorization Level 5, the highest possible level, which released certain resources, certain capabilities, certain ships and weapons systems that existed outside normal military command structure. I did not know, before that day, that we had 40 warships that nobody had ever officially told me about. The Project Requiem briefing happened in a room, with no windows, 6 levels below the main council floor. 12 people in total. Admiral Hollis sat at the head of the table and told us what existed out beyond Neptune, in the asteroid fields where nobody goes, where the cold and the dark are so complete that surveillance satellites cannot maintain consistent coverage. "We built these ships over 30 years, he said. "Not because we wanted to use them, because the galaxy is very large, and we are very new to it, and every now and then, a species old enough to know better does something that leaves us no choice." The ships were not pretty. Military ships are not built to be pretty. They are built to function, and these had been built to function at the extreme end of the range where function means something very specific. They were dark-hulled, low signature, equipped with weapons systems I had only seen in theoretical papers. The propulsion technology was 2 generations beyond anything currently in service. They were called the Requiem Fleet, and they had been waiting, quietly, for the moment that apparently had now arrived. I was given command. I want to be honest about how I felt when Admiral Hollis said those words. I did not feel proud. I did not feel ready. What I felt was something closer to the weight of a very large, very cold stone being placed on the center of my chest. The kind of weight that does not crush you, but also does not let you forget it, is there for even 1 second. "You will have your full crew from the Relentless," Hollis told me, "plus 12 specialists. Total complement across the fleet is roughly 4,000 personnel. You will have operational independence. The Council will not manage tactics from here. You will make decisions in real time, and we will trust your judgment." "And the mission parameters?" I asked. He looked at me steadily. "Recover the children, and ensure that the Vreth Dominion never does this again." I asked what the second part of that instruction meant specifically. "It means whatever you decide it means," he said, "within the boundary of one non-negotiable condition. We do not become what we are fighting against. You are authorized to end the Dominion as a military and political power. You are not authorized to harm civilians who pose no threat. The moment our forces cross that line, we lose something we can never get back." "I understand," I said. And I did. Because the thing that makes humans frightening to the rest of the galaxy is not that we are powerful. It is that we are capable of an enormous amount of power, and we still choose to put limits on it. That choice, that deliberate, costly, difficult choice, is the thing the Vreth Dominion had failed to model when they made their calculations about what humanity would do. They thought we would mourn and negotiate. They did not understand that we mourn and then we move. I had one night before we launched. I spent part of it reviewing fleet specifications and mission briefings. I spent the other part writing a letter to Mara, not a message I would send, but a letter I would keep, because some things you write, not to communicate them to someone else, but to make them real inside yourself. I wrote, "I am coming. I know you know that. Somewhere. I know you know that the moment I saw you on that screen, everything else became secondary. You are 7 years old and you wear a red jacket with a rocket on the shoulder, and you have your father's eyes, and my stubbornness, and I will cross every light year between us. I will not stop. I want you to know that. I will not stop." I folded the letter and put it in the inside pocket of my uniform jacket, where it stayed for every day of what came next. The Requiem fleet departed before dawn, by the old Earth way of counting time. 40 warships moving in formation out of the asteroid fields, running quiet, running dark, every system calibrated, and every person aboard knowing exactly what they had signed up for. We did not broadcast our departure. We did not announce our heading. The Vreth Dominion was still transmitting their signal from Alara Station. Somewhere in that signal, in a corridor barely visible at the edge of one of the frames, a red jacket moved through the darkness. We were coming. The Requiem fleet had been in motion for 11 hours when the first alien transmission found us. It came through a secure diplomatic channel, routed through 3 relay stations in a way that suggested the sender had gone to considerable effort to reach us specifically. The signal identifier belonged to the Moran Collective, a species of tall, multi-limbed beings who had been trading partners with humanity for about 40 years. Good relationship, no serious disputes. The Moran were known for being careful and deliberate, qualities I had always respected in a trade partner, and found considerably less useful at this particular moment. The message was from their High Representative, a diplomat named Esaveth, who had met with Earth's ambassador twice in the last decade. Her voice on the recording was calm and measured. Commander Vale, we understand what has happened at Alara Station. We grieve with your people, sincerely. We urge you, in the strongest terms available to us, to halt your fleet's advance and allow the Galactic Community Council time to convene a formal response mechanism. History shows that unilateral military action rarely produces durable peace. We ask you to trust the process. I listened to it twice. Then I recorded a response personally. High Representative Esaveth, thank you for your message. I will be direct with you, because you deserve directness. 312 human children are currently in Vreth custody, in conditions we have every reason to believe are harmful. Every hour we spend trusting a process is an hour they spend inside Sector Veth 7. The Galactic Community Council is welcome to convene. I will be in Vreth space before they have finished selecting a meeting time. We do not ask for your support. We ask only that you stay clear of our path. I sent it and went back to my navigation charts. 2 more messages arrived within the next 8 hours, from 2 different species, carrying variations of the same theme. One of them, from a species called the Palasi, added a specific warning. The Vreth Dominion has significant military assets. Your fleet, however capable, faces odds that our analysts estimate at 4-1 against. We strongly urge reconsideration. My tactical officer, a focused and efficient man named Lieutenant Owen Burke, was standing beside me when I read that one. He looked at me with a neutral expression that asked a question without words. 4-1, I said. Good. That means they outnumber us. It does not mean they outmatch us. He accepted that without argument. Owen Burke had been with me for 6 years. He had learned when to argue and when to simply prepare. The Requiem fleet crossed into Vreth border space on the 4th day of travel, and the first thing I noticed was the silence. No hailing signals, no border patrol challenges, no automated warning transmissions of the kind that every spacefaring species placed at territorial boundaries. Just open space, and then, on long-range sensors, the first Vreth military installation, a sensor buoy array, 16 nodes, arranged in a wide formation designed to detect approaching vessels and relay their data back to Dominion Command. They will know we are here the moment we hit that array, Priya said. They already know we are here, I said. They have been watching our departure on every public channel. The question is not whether they see us coming. The question is what they choose to do about it. Should I contact them? Standard arrival protocol? I thought about the moment they broadcast those children being walked down a corridor, live, for the entire galaxy to see. I thought about the calm, performing voice of the Vreth High Speaker, explaining that this was a correction. No, I said. No arrival protocol. Proceed. We hit the first buoy array at speed and in silence, and the array went dark 1 node at a time as our fleet passed through it. We did not destroy the buoys. We overloaded their transmission capacity with signal interference, rendering them unable to report. The Vreth monitoring stations behind them would see each buoy go quiet in sequence, and would know, very precisely, how fast we were moving and in what direction. I wanted them to know. The Vreth border fleet found us 6 hours inside their territorial boundary. They came from 3 vectors simultaneously, 2 groups from ahead and 1 from our port side. a classic formation that their strategic archives had probably used successfully against a dozen species over the course of the Dominion's expansion history. Effective against the kind of vessel you would expect a frontier patrol commander to bring to a confrontation. Not effective against the Requiem fleet. I did not call a general alert. The Requiem fleet did not have a traditional alert protocol, because the ships had not been designed for the kind of warfare where you needed to remind people that combat was beginning. Every crew member on every ship knew exactly what we were doing and why we were here. The transition from transit mode to engagement mode happened without an announcement, the way breathing happens, automatically, because the body knows what it needs. I watched the engagement on the tactical display with Owen at my side. The Vreth border fleet had 87 vessels. They were military-grade ships, well-maintained, with weapon systems appropriate to a species that had spent several centuries dominating regional space. Under normal circumstances, facing them with 40 ships would have been an extremely dangerous proposition. The Requiem fleet was not a normal circumstance. I will not describe the engagement in the language of glory, because it was not glorious. It was precise. It was necessary. It was the application of overwhelming technical advantage against a force that had not been designed to face what we brought to that encounter. The Vreth border fleet fought. I want to be clear about that, because it matters. They were not cowards. They committed to their formation and held it longer than most forces would have. But within 40 minutes, the engagement was resolved. 41 Vreth vessels were neutralized. The remaining 46 were broadcasting surrender signals. I ordered our fleet to hold. No pursuit of the surrendering vessels. Send them a message, I told Colin. Tell them, make no further hostile movement, and you will not be targeted again. Transmit their positions and condition to the Galactic Community Council for record, then resume our heading. Owen looked at me. We are leaving them? They surrendered, I said. We do not target surrendered forces. That was the instruction I was given, and it is also the right thing. Log the engagement, and let us move. He nodded, and went back to his station. News of the border engagement reached the galactic community before we had traveled another 2 hours. I knew this because the diplomatic channel became significantly more active. 3 more species transmitted messages. None of them supportive, none of them hostile, all of them shocked in a way that people are shocked when something they believed was theoretical turns out to be entirely real. The Soth transmitted again. Just 2 lines this time. You move faster than we estimated. We are revising our models. No further commentary. I filed that away. The interior of Vreth space was different from the border regions. More stations, more traffic lanes, more evidence of a civilization that had been functioning and expanding for a very long time. The Vreth were not a primitive species. They had art, architecture, a history that stretched back thousands of years, a complex society with multiple political factions, and a tradition of philosophical debate that several human scholars found genuinely interesting. None of that changed what they had done. But I want to be honest about what they were, because a commander who sees the opposition only as a target and not as a civilization makes worse decisions, not better ones. I saw them as a civilization that had made a catastrophic choice. On the 6th day of our mission, a small vessel made contact with us from inside Vreth space. It was not a military ship. It was a research and observation craft registered to an independent galactic journalism network. A mixed-species media organization called the Open Lens Collective, which operated throughout the known galaxy and was protected under 17 different species press freedom agreements. Their lead correspondent on the vessel was a being from a species called the Thari, small, with iridescent skin and recording equipment that seemed to be a physical part of them. The Thari had no equivalent word for journalist in their language, but their equivalent concept was closer to witness, and they took it very seriously. The correspondent's name, translated as closely as possible to human phonetics, was Vithala. She opened her transmission by saying, "Commander Vale, I am not going to ask you to stop. I am going to ask you to let me witness what happens next, in its entirety, so the galaxy sees it accurately, and not through anyone's chosen framing." I considered that for a moment. "Can you keep up with us at our current speed?" I asked. A pause. "If we push our engines past recommended parameters, yes. Probably." "Then keep up," I said. "And transmit everything. I want the galaxy watching this accurately." What followed over the next several days was the most widely viewed event in galactic media history, according to records compiled later. Vithala and her crew transmitted continuously, narrating in 14 languages simultaneously, covering the Requiem fleet's advance with the kind of detail that left absolutely no room for the Vreth Dominion to construct an alternative narrative. They tried anyway. The Vreth High Speaker, the same voice from the original Alara station broadcast, issued a counter-transmission claiming that humanity was committing an act of unprovoked aggression against a sovereign civilization. He described the Alara station operation as a standard resource acquisition exercise and insisted that the children were being properly maintained in Dominion facilities. I made a note of those words, properly maintained. I requested an update from our intelligence team on the status of the children at Sector Veth 7. The report came back within the hour. 312 children confirmed present at the facility, alive, unharmed in terms of immediate physical condition. Conditions within the facility were assessed as poor, inadequate nutrition, inadequate climate control for human physiology, inadequate medical monitoring. Not a crisis yet, moving toward one. I called Owen to my ready room. "I need to talk to you about a change in the operational sequence," I said. He sat down across from me. Owen Burke was the kind of officer who absorbed information first and reacted second, which was one of the things I valued most about him. I told him what I was considering, diverting part of the fleet to Sector Veth 7 for a direct extraction operation while the main fleet continued its advance toward the Dominion's command infrastructure. "Dividing the fleet puts both elements at greater risk," he said. "Yes. The children are alive, and the facility is not an immediate terminal situation. Standard doctrine would say complete the primary objective first and conduct the rescue under more favorable conditions. Doctrine would say that," I agreed. He was quiet for a moment. "But you are not going to wait." "No," I said. "I am not going to leave my daughter in a place described as proper maintenance for one day longer than it takes me to get there. And I am not going to leave any of those other children there either, for the same reason. Every one of those children has a family somewhere who is watching this feed and counting the hours." I paused. "I know the risk calculation. I am asking for your assessment of whether it is survivable." Owen pulled up the tactical display on the table between us and spent 4 minutes on it. Really spent the time, going through numbers carefully. Then he said, "With 12 ships on the extraction and 28 continuing the main advance, both elements are reduced but not critically. Sector Veth 7 has a security installation of roughly 40 Vreth vessels based on our current intelligence. 12 of our ships should be more than sufficient." He looked up. "It is survivable." "Good," I said. "Then we do it." The fleet divided at the Veth Corridor Junction, a navigational waypoint that Vreth ships use to transit between the border regions and the interior. 28 ships continued toward the Dominion's governmental and military infrastructure. 12 ships, including my own vessel, turned toward Sector Veth 7. Colin sent the course change to Vithala's crew, so they could position themselves to cover both developments simultaneously. Within minutes, the Open Lens Collective had split their coverage as well, one journalist team following each element of the fleet. The galaxy was watching everything now. On the bridge, my communications officer picked up a signal. "Commander, the Vreth High Speaker is attempting to contact us." I sat in my command chair and looked at the stars ahead on the view screen. "Log it," I said, "but do not open the channel." There were things I would say to the Vreth High Speaker, but not yet. Not until I had Mara's hand in mine. Sector Veth 7 appeared on our long-range sensors as a cluster of structures, rather than a single installation, a processing facility that had been built in stages, each addition slightly different from the last, like a building that had been started by one architect and expanded by several others over many years. It sat in the atmosphere of a small, cold moon, anchored to the rock by massive support pylons that disappeared into the gray surface below. The structures were industrial, metal and polymer, no windows in the exterior walls, no concession to anything other than function. It was a place designed for a purpose, and that purpose had never been something worth making beautiful. I counted the Vreth vessels in orbit before Owen finished his own count. 44 ships, not the 40 our intelligence had estimated. 44. Lieutenant Hart started to say something about updated numbers, and I cut him off quietly. "Owen, adjustments?" Owen had already run the new calculation. "Manageable," he said. The additional 4 vessels are older model, lower output. Our advantage holds. I gave the order and the engagement began. What I noticed, watching the tactical display during those minutes, was how different this engagement felt from the border encounter. The border fleet had been an obstacle between us and a destination. This felt different in a way I had not fully anticipated, because behind those 44 ships was the building where my daughter was sitting in the dark, in inadequate climate control, probably not knowing if anyone was coming, probably trying to be brave in the way that 7-year-olds try to be brave when they do not fully understand what is happening, but understand enough to know it is serious. We lost 4 ships in the engagement at Sector Veth 7. I need to stop on that sentence and give it its proper weight, because in the accounting of a military operation, the word lost can slip past a reader too easily. 4 Requiem fleet vessels were destroyed in the engagement at Sector Veth 7. Each ship carried between 50 and 60 crew members. The total number of our people who did not come home from that fight was 61. Their names were on a list on my secondary display throughout the extraction operation, and I read every one of them twice, alone in my ready room, before we entered the facility. We went in through 3 entry points simultaneously, moving fast and in coordinated teams. The Vreth security force inside the facility was significantly smaller than the orbital complement, 30 soldiers managing a population of captives who were, for obvious reasons, not in a position to resist them. Our teams encountered resistance at 2 of the 3 entry points and resolved it quickly. At the 3rd entry point, the security forces stood down before our team reached them, and my team leader, a specialist named Lieutenant Fiona Cole, reported that the Vreth guards had placed their weapons on the floor and stepped back from the captives of their own initiative. "They are young," Fiona said over the comm. "The guards. Some of them look almost as young as the children." I absorbed that. "Secure them and move on," I said. "No harm to anyone who is not actively threatening our people." The facility interior was exactly as the intelligence assessment had described it. Cold, poorly lit, the kind of atmosphere that is technically survivable for a human child, but communicates in every possible physical way that the humans inside it are not the priority. I walked through corridors that smelled of processed air and industrial polymer, and something else underneath. The particular smell of fear that human biology releases when it has been afraid for too long. And then I heard her. Not her voice. She was not crying or calling out. But I know my daughter's footsteps. Even after months apart, in a dark corridor on a cold moon in Vreth space, I know the particular rhythm of how she moves. She rounds corners at a slight angle, slightly leading with her left shoulder. She had been doing it since she was 3 years old, and her father used to call it her corner style. I turned the corner, and she was standing in a group of 11 other children, all of them looking toward the sounds of our boots on the floor, all of them with that particular expression that children have when they are trying very hard to understand whether what is happening is good or bad. She looked at me. I looked at her. The red jacket was still on her. It was dirty now, and the yellow rocket patch had come slightly loose at one corner, but it was still there. I walked to her, and I crouched down to her level, and she grabbed my hand with both of hers and held it very tightly, and neither of us said anything for a long moment, because some moments do not benefit from words. The other children were looking at us. My team was moving through the corridor, securing the area around us. Fiona was watching from 6 meters away, with an expression that she would probably deny having, if I ever mentioned it. Mara looked up at me eventually, with those wide, serious eyes that she got from her father. "Did you bring the whole ship?" she asked. "I brought 40 ships," I said. She considered that. "That is a lot." "You are worth a lot," I said. She accepted that, with the gravity that children apply to things they already believed, but find reassuring to hear confirmed. Getting 312 children off a moon in Vreth space, organized, fed, medically assessed, and secured onto transport vessels while simultaneously ensuring facility security, was a 4-hour operation. I will tell you that it is the 4 hours I am most proud of in my entire career. Every one of our people was focused and careful and patient in a situation where patience required effort. No child was rushed or frightened more than they had already been. Fiona Cole specifically organized a system where each child was paired with one crew member as a dedicated companion for the transfer process, so that no child walked from the facility to the transport vessel without a person next to them who knew their name and talked to them, and made sure they were seen as a person, and not as a logistical problem to be moved. When all 312 were confirmed aboard the transport vessels, I stood for a moment, in the empty corridor, where I had found Mara, and let myself breathe. 61 of my people had not come home. They had not come home so that these 312 children could go home. I read the names again, quietly, in the empty corridor. Every name. I said each one aloud, because I believe in the practice of speaking the names of people who deserve to be spoken of. Then I walked back to my ship. We had a secondary fleet to rejoin. The Vreth Dominion's governmental center was located on Vreth Prime, the home world of the species, a planet of considerable size, orbited by 2 moons, with a long history of civilization that included genuine contributions to science, mathematics, and certain forms of art. The planet had a population of approximately 2 billion. It had cities, universities, hospitals, families, gardens, and markets. It was a real place, where real people lived their lives. I want to be very clear that I never lost sight of this. The Requiem fleet's 28 vessels, having completed their advance through Vreth interior space, were now holding position at the edge of Vreth Prime's gravity well, waiting for my element to rejoin them. When the 12 extraction ships emerged from the transit corridor and took their positions in the reformed fleet, I felt the moment settle around me with a particular weight. The weight of a thing that has not happened yet but is going to, and cannot now be avoided. Before any further movement, I requested a full status from Fleet Command. What came back included something I had not anticipated. 3 alien diplomatic ships had arrived at our position during the 14 hours of my element's absence. 3 different species, 3 different levels of urgency, all of them wanting to speak with me before we proceeded. The Moran Collective, the Palasi, and a 3rd species called the Vundi, who were significant in galactic affairs primarily because they were deeply trusted as neutral parties, and their diplomatic presence at any conflict was widely considered a stabilizing influence. A meeting with all 3 species was requested. I agreed to it, not because I was wavering, but because what I was about to do was significant enough that it deserved witnesses who would report it accurately, and because if I was going to establish something that lasted beyond this mission, I needed the galactic community to understand exactly what that something was. The meeting took place on a neutral channel, all parties in video communication. I sat in my command chair with the view screen showing me 3 very different alien faces, all of them watching me with varying degrees of anxiety. The Moran representative spoke first. She was not Esaveth, who had sent the earlier message. This was a senior figure, someone with the quiet authority that comes from long experience. Commander Vale, you have recovered the children from Alara Station. The immediate humanitarian crisis is resolved. We ask you, earnestly, to consider whether further military action is now necessary. The Palasi representative went next, shorter and more direct. The Vreth Dominion has a significant civilian population. We urge you to remember the distinction between a government and a people. The Vundi representative said nothing immediately. When she spoke, she said only, "We want to understand what you intend, in specific terms." I told them. I laid it out clearly, without passion, in the kind of measured and precise language that diplomats use when they want there to be no room for misinterpretation. The Vreth Dominion, as a political and military power, would be dissolved. Their fleet would be surrendered. Their military infrastructure would be dismantled under galactic oversight. The civilian population of Vreth Prime would not be targeted. Aid operations would be coordinated with the Galactic Community Council to ensure a stable transition, and the individuals responsible for the decision to conduct the Alara Station raid, specifically the Vreth High Speaker and the members of the Dominion Senate who had authorized it, would be transferred to galactic custody to stand trial before the first formal war crimes tribunal in galactic history. The 3 representatives were quiet for a moment. The Vundi representative said, "You are not proposing to destroy them." "No," I said, "I am proposing accountability. There is a significant difference, and I want the galaxy to understand that difference completely, because the Vreth Dominion seems to have calculated that humanity could not sustain one. They were wrong. And if the Vreth refuse these terms, then we proceed as a military force," I said. "But our targets remain military and political infrastructure only. That line does not move, not under any circumstances." Another silence. The Moran representative said, "We will observe." The Palasi representative said, "We will report accurately to the council." The Vundi representative said, "We will coordinate the tribunal framework, on the condition that you honor every element of the terms you have stated." "You have my word," I said. "And you have 36 warships watching to make sure it is kept." The channel closed. I turned to Colin. "Open a channel to the Vreth High Speaker." This time, when the channel opened, I did not wait for him to speak first. "High Speaker," I said, "this is Commander Asha Vale, commanding the United Earth Federation Requiem Fleet, currently positioned in orbit of Vreth Prime. I have in my fleet 312 human children, recovered from Sector Veth 7, who are alive and returning to their families. I have representatives from the Moran Collective, the Palasi, and the Vundi observing this transmission. I am going to tell you exactly what happens next, and I need you to listen carefully, because I will say it once." I paused for exactly 3 seconds. Then I delivered the terms. The High Speaker listened without interrupting. He was a tall, lean figure on the screen, the kind of being who had probably spent decades perfecting the appearance of calm authority. He maintained it during most of my transmission, but in the last 30 seconds of it, something changed in his face. Not fear, exactly. Something closer to recognition. The specific look of a person who has made a calculation that turned out to be profoundly wrong, and is only now understanding the full extent of the error. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You destroyed our border fleet," he said. "Yes." "You extracted the captives from Sector Veth 7. "Yes." "You are positioned with 36 warships above our home world." "Yes," I said. "I want to also tell you that I lost 4 ships in the extraction operation. 61 of my crew did not come home. I mention this not to frighten you. I think you are already frightened, but because you should know the cost of what you decided to do, and the specific human weight of it." He was very still. "You have 47 minutes to transmit your response," I said, "after which we will interpret your silence as a rejection of terms, and proceed accordingly." I closed the channel. The bridge was very quiet. Owen was looking at his tactical display. Priya was watching her navigation readouts. Fiona Cole, who had led the extraction team, and was now serving as a secondary tactical officer, because I needed her skills close, was reviewing the fleet formation data. Colin said, quietly, 47 minutes, Commander? Not 48? Not 50? 47 is the number of minutes between when the Vreth began moving the children at Alara Station, and when the first of them was aboard a Vreth transport ship, I said. The High Speaker's communications team will have flagged that number. He will understand what it means. Colin absorbed that. "You have been counting from the beginning." "Yes," I said. "I count everything." The reply came in 31 minutes. 16 minutes early, which in diplomatic terms, is the equivalent of someone running toward you rather than walking. The Vreth Dominion accepted the terms. All of them. Without counter-proposals, without conditions, without the usual political machinery of a civilization trying to salvage something from a failed position. The acceptance was broadcast on every Vreth government channel simultaneously. It acknowledged that what they had done had consequences that extended beyond their ability to manage, and that the species they had intended to demonstrate was manageable, had instead demonstrated something quite different about itself. The Galactic Community Council, which had been in emergency session throughout the last 72 hours of the mission, formalized their observer status within hours of the acceptance. The Vundi began coordinating the tribunal framework almost immediately. Ships from 4 species arrived in Vreth Prime's orbit over the next 2 days to assist with the transition process, because it turns out that when humanity demonstrates resolve of a particular kind, a significant portion of the galactic community suddenly becomes very eager to be associated with the outcome. The Vreth High Speaker and 14 members of the Dominion Senate were transferred to galactic custody on the 4th day. On the 3rd day, I had done something that was not in any operational brief, and not something I had planned. I had gone down to the transport vessel where Mara and the other children were being kept comfortable and monitored by medical staff, and I had asked whether any of the children wanted to see what Vreth Prime looked like from orbit before we left. The medical officer in charge, a woman named Dr. Lane, looked at me with an expression that might have been surprise and might have been approval. "You want the children who were held captive by the Vreth to look at their homeworld from space. I want them to understand," I said, "that it is a big galaxy, and it is full of very different kinds of people. Some of those people make terrible choices, and those choices have consequences. But the galaxy itself is not the answer to their fear. I want them to go home knowing that. Because some of them will grow up to be in positions where that understanding matters. Dr. Lane was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I will ask them. 41 of the 312 children wanted to see. We brought them to the observation deck in small groups. I stood with each group for a few minutes. Most of them were quiet, looking at the brown and gray curve of the planet below through the viewport. A few asked questions. A boy named Patrick, who was about 9 years old and had a serious, thoughtful manner, asked me why the planet looked so much like Earth from here. Most of the habitable worlds in this region of space formed under similar conditions, I said. Rock, an atmosphere, and heat from a star. The details are different, but the process is the same. So they started out the same as us, he said. In a way, I said. He thought about that. Then what happened? I did not have an easy answer for that. It was one of those questions that sounds simple and contains everything. I think, I said slowly, that what happened is the same thing that has always happened, everywhere. People in power decided that power was more important than the people they had power over. It is not a Vreth problem. It is not a human problem. It is an old problem that every civilization has to decide how to handle. Patrick looked at the planet for another moment. Is it handled now? For today, I said. How long it stays handled depends on everyone remembering what happened today. He nodded slowly. I will remember, he said. I know you will, I said. That is why I brought you up here. The journey home took longer than the journey out. Not because of distance. We returned along a slightly different route to avoid debris fields from the border engagement. But because the nature of the trip was different. Going out, everyone on those ships was carried by urgency. Coming back, urgency had been replaced by something heavier and quieter, the particular exhaustion that follows extreme intensity. I held a memorial service on the 5th day of the return journey. Every ship in the fleet participated, connected by open channel. I read the 61 names aloud, and after each name I waited 3 seconds, because 3 seconds is not nothing, and people who are gone deserve at least that. Afterward, in my ready room, I wrote in my captain's log for the first time since the mission began. I had been recording operational logs throughout, but those were factual records of events, times, decisions. The personal log was different. It was where I wrote the things that mattered, in a way that facts alone could not capture. I wrote, we went in because of what was taken from us. We came back with it, but we did not come back the same as we left, and I do not think we should pretend otherwise. The galaxy saw something on this mission. Not power. Power is common. They saw something rarer. They saw a species that can remove every limitation and chooses not to. They saw a species that counts its losses, that speaks its dead by name, that sits with children in front of a viewport and answers their impossible questions honestly. Whatever else we are, whatever else we become, I want that to be the thing they remember. Mara came to the bridge on the 7th day of the return journey. She had been cleared by Dr. Lane for normal activity, and she had apparently decided that normal activity included spending time with her mother on the bridge of a warship. She sat in the observer's chair beside my command station and watched the stars on the view screen, and occasionally asked Colin technical questions about navigation systems that he answered with genuine enthusiasm, because Colin appreciated people who asked good questions regardless of their age. At one point, she leaned over to me and said, in a voice quiet enough that only I could hear, the other children are worried about going home. Why worried? I asked. Because they do not know how things will be. After. She thought about it. Things feel different now. Even if everything looks the same when we get back. Things are different, I said. You are right about that. But different does not have to mean worse. What does it mean then? I looked at the stars ahead. I thought about Patrick and his question about what happened to civilizations. I thought about the Soth, 10,000 years old, revising their models. I thought about 61 names on a list and what they meant. It means you learn something about the universe that most people learn much later, if they ever learn it at all, I said. You learned that the universe is serious, that it contains real danger and real beauty, and that the two are sometimes very close to each other. And you learn that when something serious happens, there are people who come. That is not a small thing to know. Mara was quiet for a moment, the way she gets when she is processing something. "You came," she said. "Yes," I said. "Were you scared?" I thought about honesty versus comfort, and chose honesty, because Mara had already been through something real, and she deserved a real answer. "Yes," I said. "I was scared the whole time. I was scared I would be too late, or that something would go wrong, or that I would make a decision that cost other people their lives." I paused. It did cost people their lives. 61 of them. That is part of what I am carrying home. She was quiet again for longer this time. Then she said, "They knew when they came, right? That it might be dangerous?" "Yes," I said. "They knew. So they chose to come." "Yes." She looked at the stars. "Then they made the same choice you made, to come." I looked at my daughter, 7 years old, in a red jacket, with a loose rocket patch, sitting in the observer's chair, and thought about the kind of person she was going to be someday. "Yes," I said. "They did." She reached over and took my hand, the way she had taken it in the corridor on the cold moon, both hands, firmly. We traveled the rest of the way home like that. We were 4 days from Earth when the Soth made third contact. It did not come through the diplomatic channels the way their previous messages had. This one came through a frequency that our communications team initially flagged as an error, an ancient frequency, one that predated most modern communication protocols, and that nobody actively used anymore, because there were much better options. When Colin ran the decryption on it, the message resolved into clean and perfect galactic standard, which meant whoever had sent it had decided to use an old channel specifically, for reasons that were probably intentional. The message was from the Soth ambassador to the galactic community, an ancient title held by an ancient being whose name translated as something like "Deep River Still Moving." Galactic protocol allowed for shortened references, and most species called this individual simply the Elder. The message said, "Commander Vale, we have observed your mission in its entirety, as we observe most things that occur within our awareness. We have watched many species conduct military operations in our time. We have watched many more fail to conduct them at all, submitting to whatever threatened them until they no longer existed. We have never, in 10,000 years of observation, seen a species do precisely what you did in the way that you did it. You went when you were told to wait. You recovered what was taken. You refused 3 ceasefire offers. You established the first Galactic War Crimes Tribunal. You sat with captive children in front of a viewport and answered their questions honestly. And you came home. We have communicated with your planet's government to request formal diplomatic relations. This is not a small request for us. We have not made it of any species in 400 years. We make it now because we believe that a species capable of what you just demonstrated is worth knowing before it surprises us again." I read the message twice. Then I forwarded it to Fleet Command with a brief note that said, "Someone may want to prepare a response to this. I suggest using our best diplomatic language, and not our second best." There was a reply from Director Clara Osei within the hour. Her note said simply, "Already preparing. Also, the media would like a statement from you on the Soth development. Recommend keeping it short. You have said everything important already." She was right. I had. What I felt, reading that Soth message and thinking about what it meant, was complicated in the way that most important things are complicated when you are honest about them. There was something that might have been pride, if pride were allowed to be quiet and weary and tinged with grief. There was gratitude, for a crew that had trusted me, and performed beyond what I had any right to expect. There was grief, for 61 people whose families were somewhere in the remaining distance between us and home, waiting in the specific difficulty of knowing the outcome, but not yet being able to close it. And there was something else, a feeling I found harder to name, which I eventually decided was responsibility. Not the weight of command, which I was already accustomed to. Something larger, the understanding that what had happened in Vreth space was not just an event, it was a precedent. The galaxy had watched a species be pushed past a certain line, and watched what came out of them when that happened, and the galaxy would remember. Every species in known space would be filing that information away, and making calculations based on it. The calculations they made would depend heavily on what humanity did next. Whether we were the species that had done this once and learned from it, or the species that had done this once and wanted to do it again. Whether we were the species that came home and grieved and kept our limits, or the species that tasted the absence of limits and reached for more. I wrote in my captain's log again that night. I wrote, "We have set a standard that we now have to live up to. That is heavier than most victories, but I think it is the right weight to carry. The galaxy is watching to see if we are what we appeared to be, or if what they saw was an exception. I intend to spend the rest of my career ensuring it was not an exception. I intend to be, without drama or announcement, exactly what I showed them we were. A person who comes when coming is hard, who counts her losses, who remembers every name, and who brings people home." Earth appeared on the long-range sensors on the 4th day, exactly as predicted. It looked the way it always does from deep space, which is small and bright and blue in a way that never quite matches the mental image you carry of it, until you see it again, at which point you wonder how you ever forgot the exact shade. The fleet was met, at the edge of the system, by a reception formation of 12 UEF vessels. Not an escort under uncertain conditions, but an honor formation, the kind of slow and deliberate arrangement that says, "We saw what you did, and we wanted you to see us standing here when you came back." Colin informed me that Fleet Command was transmitting compliments to every ship in the fleet individually. I told him to acknowledge each one personally, ship by ship, and to thank them by name. We came down through Earth's atmosphere in stages. The fleet stayed in orbit. The transport vessels carrying the children were brought in first, to the processing center at New Cape Station, where 312 families were waiting. I was told later that the reunion process took most of the day, and that the medical team had to take some of the waiting parents to the medical wing because the waiting had become physically difficult for them, which is a thing that happens to human bodies sometimes when emotion reaches a certain intensity. I was not there for the mass reunion. I had one reunion to attend. Mara's father, a quiet and patient man named Gregory, was waiting at the private landing terminal they had arranged for us. He had taken the news of Alara Station the way he took most serious news, with an external stillness that covered a very specific kind of anguish, because Gregory was the kind of person who processes things inward and comes out the other side intact, which I had always found one of the things I most respected about him. When Mara ran down the boarding ramp and reached him, he held her for a long time, and she let him, which meant she had needed it too. I came down the ramp behind her, and Gregory looked at me over her head and did not say anything, but the look was enough. Some things are too large for language, and we both knew that. I put my hand on his shoulder briefly, and then stepped back and let them have the moment. That evening, the formal statement went out to galactic media. It was short. The final line, which I wrote myself, and which has apparently been quoted more than any other single line from the mission, was this: "The galaxy is quieter now. We will see how long that lasts." It was not a threat. It was an observation. The difference matters. The Vreth War Crimes Tribunal convened 6 weeks later, presided over by a panel of 3 galactic judges representing 3 species, with observers from 11 others. It lasted 4 months, and produced a series of verdicts and precedents that galactic legal scholars are still studying. The Vreth Dominion as a political entity was dissolved. Vreth Prime and the associated systems moved under a transitional governance framework supported by several galactic community organizations. Some Vreth officials were held accountable by the tribunal. Some civilian administrators remained in place to keep infrastructure functioning, because infrastructure does not care about political transitions, and neither do the people who depend on it. It was not a clean outcome. Nothing real is clean. Patrick, the 9-year-old who had asked me what happened to civilizations, sent me a message 8 months later through the Standard Communications Network. He had found my address through a public directory, which I thought showed either good research skills or helpful adults. The message said, "Commander Vale, I remembered what you said about the galaxy being serious. I am trying to learn as much about it as I can. My teacher says I ask too many questions. I told her that is because there are too many things to understand. She did not have a response to that. I thought you might appreciate it. Thank you for bringing us home." I kept that message in the same folder as the letter to Mara. On the 1-year anniversary of the mission, I was called to a formal recognition ceremony at Fleet Command. There were speeches, there were medals. There was a significant amount of ceremonial content that I experienced mostly by being present at it rather than by being deeply engaged with it, because what I was thinking about, standing in that room full of admirals and council members and galactic observers and journalists, was simpler than anything being said at the podium. I was thinking about 61 names. When it was my turn to speak, I did not use the prepared remarks. I said, "A year ago, a decision was made to take children as a demonstration of power. The people who made that decision believed that humanity was a species that could be managed from a position of assumed superiority. They had not done accurate research. We are not a species that forgets what was taken from us. We are not a species that stops. But I want to be specific about something, because specificity matters. We are also not a species that loses itself. We are not a species that crosses certain lines because we have the power to cross them. We came home with our dead counted and our limits intact. If there is anything I want the galaxy to learn from this, it is that second part. The first part, the part where we do not stop, they have already learned. The second part is the harder lesson. It is also the more important one." After the ceremony, as people moved toward the reception, Admiral Hollis walked beside me for a moment. "The Soth's first formal diplomatic meeting with Earth is next month," he said. "The Elder has requested that you attend." "As what?" I asked. "As yourself," he said. "Apparently that is sufficient." I thought about that for a moment. About a 10,000-year-old civilization revising its models. About a small being named Vithala who had pushed her engines past recommended parameters to witness something accurately. About Patrick's question and the honest answer that nobody fully has. "I will attend," I said. Hollis nodded. "Good." He paused. "How is Mara?" "She wants to be an explorer," I said. "Same as always. Last week she told her teacher that the galaxy is serious but worth understanding. Her teacher apparently said it was the most thoughtful thing she had heard a 7-year-old say." Hollis almost smiled. "She has good sources." "She does," I said. Outside the windows of Fleet Command Station Arcturus, the stars were where they always were, countless and patient and very far away. The galaxy was quieter than it had been a year ago. Whether it stayed that way depended on many things, and the calculation included factors that no one could fully account for, because the future is not a navigation chart. You can plot a heading, but you cannot guarantee what you find when you arrive. What I knew, standing there, was simpler than the future. I knew who we were. I knew what we had done. I knew the names of the people who had made it possible. I knew my daughter was somewhere on Earth right now, wearing a red jacket with a loose rocket patch, looking up at the same stars I was looking at, probably asking questions that would take a lifetime to answer. And I knew that if the day ever came when something pushed us past that line again, if the galaxy ever forgot what it had learned, if someone, somewhere, made a calculation about humanity that did not account for what we carry inside us, the answer would be the same one it had always been. We would come. We would count every cost. We would bring our people home. And the galaxy, very quietly, would remember.